I came to fix her light switch, but I didn't expect to turn her heart on instead. Started as a simple favor. I had come over to her apartment to fix a flickering light switch she'd complained about earlier in the week. I knew it was small, almost trivial, but something about the way she had asked me, quietly, politely, with a hint of tiredness in her voice, made me want to be thorough. I wasn't expecting this to be anything more than a quick job. She opened the door before I could even knock, leaning slightly against the frame, and I had to stop myself from noticing how effortless she was. She was in her early 40s, but there was something about her posture, the subtle way she carried herself, that made her seem ageless. Her hair caught the morning light streaming through the window, and her eyes, warm, curious, and just a little guarded, met mine. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of the small toolkit in my hand. "Thanks for coming so quickly," she said, her voice soft but certain. There was no pretense, no forced cheerfulness, just a simple sincerity that made me want to measure my words more carefully than usual. I knelt by the light switch, unscrewing the cover and inspecting the wiring. It was the kind of small, mechanical problem I could solve without much thought, but my focus kept drifting. I caught her leaning slightly over the counter, observing me, her fingers brushing against the edge as she shifted her weight. I felt a strange awareness of her presence, a subtle energy that seemed to linger in the air around us. "Be careful with that wire," she said softly, almost as if reading my thoughts. Her hand hovered near mine for a moment while pointing, and our fingers brushed lightly. I froze for a heartbeat, my mind stumbling over the simplicity of the touch. She smiled, a little awkward, a little amused, and I felt the warmth spread from my chest down to my fingers. The apartment itself felt intimate, almost comforting. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the subtle musk of her perfume. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor, highlighting the small imperfections in the walls, the little signs of a life well lived. It was easy to imagine her here, going about her mornings, the quiet routines that made this apartment more than just a space. It was a part of her. We didn't talk much at first. She watched, I worked, and in those few minutes, a silent understanding began to form. There was no pressure, no expectations, only the quiet rhythm of two people sharing a space. Every glance, every brief touch carried more meaning than the words we hadn't spoken yet. By the time I finished the switch, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just about fixing a light anymore. It was the awareness of her presence, the subtle connection forming between us. And in that soft morning glow, with the hum of the city beyond the window, I caught myself wondering if I would ever look at a simple favor the same way again. After I finished the light switch, I had planned to pack up my tools and leave. But she asked me to double-check the lamp in the corner, the one that flickered sometimes when the morning sun hit it just right. I didn't mind. Somehow, being there a little longer felt easier, more natural. She sat on the edge of her sofa, one knee tucked under her, watching me carefully as I adjusted the lamp's wiring. "You really know your way around these things," she said quietly, a soft note of admiration in her voice. I shrugged, trying to keep it casual, but she noticed the slight tension in my shoulders anyway. She had that way of noticing things, little details I didn't even realize I was giving away. We started talking as I worked. It began with small talk, the weather, the hum of the city outside, the subtle clatter of dishes from a neighbor's apartment. Then it drifted, almost naturally, to books, music, and the quiet routines of our lives. She laughed at one of my clumsy jokes, a short, surprised laugh that made her eyes crinkle just slightly at the corners. And I noticed her hands, the way they rested lightly on her lap, fingers flexing as if she were subconsciously keeping track of every movement around her. There was a warmth growing between us, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't just the sunlight or the soft glow of the lamp. It was the kind of warmth that comes from understanding and quiet trust. I found myself drawn to the sound of her voice, the way she paused before answering, considering her words. She noticed the same in me, I think, the slight hesitations, the little glances that lingered longer than necessary. At one point, I handed her a screwdriver to tighten a loose screw on the lamp's base. Our fingers brushed, just the tips, but it felt electric. She didn't pull away, just let her hand rest for a moment longer than required. I felt the heat in my own palm and a subtle pulse in my chest, an awareness I couldn't ignore. She gave me a small, almost shy smile, and I realized neither of us wanted to break the moment. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, comforting and lived in. Sunlight shifted as the morning wore on, brushing against her hair and highlighting the gentle lines around her eyes. Everything about her was graceful, quiet, and unassuming. Yet there was an energy there, subtle, magnetic, that kept pulling my attention back, no matter how hard I tried to focus on the work at hand. By the time the lamp was fixed, a silence had settled comfortably between us. We weren't speaking, yet the room was filled with a new understanding. Something had shifted, a recognition of shared space, shared presence, and the subtle beginnings of something deeper. The connection was unspoken but tangible, like the soft hum of electricity running through the wires I'd just fixed. As I packed my tools to leave, I caught her watching me again, that quiet curiosity and warmth in her gaze. I wondered if she felt it too, that quiet pull, that strange mix of comfort and tension. I walked toward the door, glancing back once. The world outside the apartment felt distant, as if everything that mattered in that moment was contained within the soft light and the space we had quietly claimed together. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day that makes the world feel suspended just outside the window. I was adjusting the lampshade in her living room, trying to angle the light so it didn't cast harsh shadows across the room. She moved closer, offering to steady the base of the lamp as I tilted it. Our hands met, just briefly, just a flicker, but it was enough to stop time for a heartbeat. Neither of us spoke immediately. Her fingers lingered against mine, soft and warm, and I felt a jolt of awareness shoot through me. It was the kind of touch that seemed innocent to anyone watching, but to me, it carried a quiet weight, a small but undeniable spark. She looked up at me then, eyes wide for just a second, and I caught the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I tried to laugh it off, muttering something about the lamp being stubborn, but my voice sounded different even to me, a little higher, a little uncertain. She laughed too, a gentle, melodic sound that made me realize how much I was noticing it, and noticing her, more than I probably should. There was a brief pause, just long enough for the air to feel charged. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, subtle and comforting, mingled with the faint tang of metal from the lamp I had been adjusting. The sunlight filtering through the curtains caught the soft highlights in her hair and the curve of her cheekbone, making her look momentarily ethereal. I couldn't help but notice the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted the lamp, and I felt an almost protective urge to steady them, to keep her close in this suspended moment. When she finally withdrew her hand, there was a hesitation, a subtle pullback that told me neither of us wanted the moment to end. Our eyes met, and in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between us. Curiosity, attraction, and a cautious acknowledgement of what could be. I felt my own pulse quicken, awareness of her presence filling every corner of my attention. We didn't force conversation to fill the silence. Instead, we leaned slightly closer over the lamp, moving in tandem, almost like a dance neither of us had rehearsed. I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her arm, the subtle brush of fabric as we adjusted the shade together. Every small motion, her hand guiding the lamp, my fingers steadying her touch, carried more meaning than words ever could. By the time the lamp was perfectly aligned, I realized the quiet electricity between us hadn't faded. It lingered, wrapping around the edges of the room, in the small glances and the way our hands moved near each other without touching. Even as I packed up my tools, I felt it. A magnetic pull that made it hard to leave, hard to act casual, and impossible to ignore. She smiled at me then, soft and knowing, and I returned it with a shy tilt of my head. In that moment, I understood something. This wasn't just about a lamp or a light switch. It was about the quiet connection forming between us, delicate and electric, and I couldn't wait to see where it might lead. After the lamp was finally settled and the afternoon sunlight shifted across her living room, a quiet stillness filled the space. The hum of the city outside became a soft background, almost like a gentle audience to the moment between us. I found myself sitting on the edge of her sofa, my toolbox at my feet, feeling more aware of her presence than the room itself. She sank into the cushions beside me, close enough that the air between us seemed almost tangible. "Do you ever get tired of fixing things for other people?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but curious. There was no judgment in it, just an invitation, as if she wanted to see past the surface, past the tools and repairs, and into the person behind them. I hesitated. Most people don't ask questions like that. Most people only care about whether the switch works. But here, in the warmth of her apartment, with sunlight catching the highlights in her hair, I found myself opening up. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I like seeing the little relief on someone's face when it's done right. Makes it worth it." She nodded slowly, tilting her head as she studied me. I admire that about you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The way you notice the details, the way you don't rush through things." She paused, and there was a weight in her eyes, a vulnerability that made me lean in just slightly, instinctively wanting to be closer, to bridge the invisible gap between us. We fell into a quiet rhythm of conversation after that, one that felt almost like a dance. She spoke of past relationships, of times she'd hesitated, of the subtle loneliness that sometimes came with experience and independence. I shared my own small confessions, mistakes I'd made, the little insecurities I rarely admitted, the moments when I felt out of place in the world despite my best efforts. Her hand brushed against mine at one point, accidental yet deliberate in the way it lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. I felt the warmth spread through me, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of us was pretending. We were both here, fully present, and aware of the pull between us. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, layered over the subtle scent of coffee lingering in the kitchen. The sunlight softened as the day waned, casting long shadows across the floor and her bookshelves. Every small movement, the tilt of her head, the shift of her shoulders, the way her fingers played with the edge of the cushion, felt amplified, meaningful, intimate. By the time the conversation drew to a natural pause, something had changed. There was a softness in her gaze, a quiet trust, a shared understanding that neither words nor actions had yet fully defined. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, full of possibility. I realized then that this afternoon, this simple task of fixing a lamp had become something entirely different. It wasn't just about repairs anymore. It was about connection, about noticing the little things that make a person who they are, and about the slow, delicate threading of hearts toward one another. And in that quiet, sunlit room, I knew that whatever this was, subtle, fragile, unspoken, it had begun, and there was no going back. The lamp was finally adjusted perfectly, its soft glow filling the corners of the room. The afternoon had settled into that golden, lazy light that made everything feel warmer, slower, more intimate. I was about to pack up my tools when she leaned casually against the counter, a playful glint in her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice teasing but calm, "I think you didn't just fix the lamp today." She tilted her head, letting the words hang in the air, and I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though I felt a sudden heat rise in my cheeks. She smirked, that quiet, knowing smile that seemed effortless yet entirely magnetic. "I think you might have turned me on instead." She said it with such a casual tone, almost like she was commenting on the weather, but the air between us shifted instantly. My hands froze over the screwdriver I was holding. I tried to respond with a joke, fumbling slightly. "Well, I suppose that's a common side effect of good wiring." I managed a nervous laugh, but she chuckled, that soft, warm sound that made me feel both embarrassed and strangely exhilarated. The room suddenly felt smaller, cozier. The sunlight caught the highlights in her hair, making it glow softly, and her eyes sparkled with amusement. There was a mischievous confidence in the way she leaned slightly toward me, just enough that our shoulders nearly brushed. I noticed the faint perfume lingering in the space between us, warm and inviting, and the soft rustle of her clothing as she shifted her weight. "What about you?" she asked, tilting her head and giving me a sly smile. "Do you ever get distracted by the people you're supposed to be helping?" I felt a mixture of heat and honesty. "Maybe a little," I admitted, my voice quieter now. The words felt dangerous in the best way. Teasing but loaded with truth. She laughed again, leaning a little closer, her fingers brushing against mine as she gestured toward the lamp. The accidental touch lingered just a second too long, a silent acknowledgement of the attraction simmering between us. My chest tightened, a slow, steady awareness of her closeness and the unspoken tension. There was something effortless about this flirtation, a slow, deliberate teasing that didn't rush the moment. It wasn't vulgar or forced. It was playful, intimate, and entirely alive with the electric undercurrent of unspoken desire. Every glance, every laugh, every subtle brush of her hand was a promise of something deeper, something neither of us was ready to name yet. By the time I finally packed up the last of my tools, the playful energy hadn't faded. It had settled into something warmer, something heavier beneath the laughter. I realized that these small, teasing moments, the jokes, the glances, the gentle touches, were quietly transforming the air between us. As I glanced toward her, she gave me one last teasing smile before turning back to the lamp, and I knew it. The connection we had been slowly building wasn't just emotional anymore. It was alive, vibrant, and charged. A silent promise of what might come next, if we dared to let it. The afternoon had faded into a soft, amber evening, the city outside her window quieting down as lights began to twinkle in neighboring apartments. Inside, the apartment felt warmer, cozier, as if the air itself had shifted around us. We had been talking, laughing, teasing. That playful energy from earlier had deepened into something quieter, heavier, more charged. She reached toward the lamp one last time, adjusting its angle slightly so the glow fell perfectly across the room. I instinctively stepped closer, guiding her hand gently, my fingers brushing hers. For a brief moment, we both froze, aware of the closeness, aware of how easily the space between us had vanished. Her eyes met mine, and there was a softness there, a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I could see the faint catch in her breath, the subtle way her shoulders lifted, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to my nearness. I leaned slightly closer, careful, deliberate, and felt the warmth radiating from her arm. It was magnetic, tender, a quiet intimacy that didn't need words. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, sweet and grounding, layered over the soft scent of the lamp's warm glow and the lingering aroma of coffee from the morning. The light highlighted the gentle curve of her cheek, the faint lines around her eyes that told stories I suddenly wanted to read. Every small motion she made, tilting her head, adjusting her hair, shifting her weight, seemed amplified, meaningful. We both laughed softly at a shared joke, and the sound felt like it filled the entire apartment. In that laugh, in the pause that followed, the tension hung between us, palpable, electric, and undeniably intimate. Our fingers brushed again, lingering just long enough for awareness to spark in both of us. The subtle heat of her hand against mine, the accidental closeness of our bodies, made me acutely conscious of every breath, every heartbeat. She glanced down for a moment, then back up, and in that shared gaze we both understood something without saying it. There was no need for words. The space between us had disappeared, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of mutual attraction, curiosity, and something deeper, a connection that went beyond the playful teasing or casual conversation of the day. The world outside the apartment seemed to blur, leaving only the warmth between us, the gentle hum of the lamp, and the soft rhythm of our breaths. It was a moment suspended in time, delicate yet intense, intimate without ever crossing into anything explicit. I realized then that this was the pinnacle of everything that had been building since I'd first stepped through her door. The curiosity, the subtle tension, the emotional intimacy, and the playful flirtation had all converged into this quiet, charged closeness. It wasn't just about proximity. It was about understanding, noticing, and feeling each other fully in that space. And in that lingering gaze, that brief brush of fingers, I knew the next step was inevitable. Whatever came after, we had crossed a threshold, and neither of us could unfeel what had begun. The evening had settled into a quiet hush. Outside, the city lights twinkled faintly through her window, and the faint hum of traffic felt distant, almost irrelevant. Inside, the apartment was bathed in the soft glow of the newly fixed lamp. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, lingering in the corners, comforting and warm. After hours of laughter, teasing, and conversation, there was a sense of calm that neither of us had expected. I was gathering my tools, trying to act casual, though my hands trembled slightly from the awareness of her presence. She watched me from the sofa, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips, the kind of smile that's equal parts warmth and curiosity, knowing and inviting. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough weight to stop me in my tracks. I looked up, meeting her gaze, and saw something I hadn't seen before. A vulnerability softened by trust, a quiet acknowledgement that the day had been more than ordinary for either of us. I stepped closer, unsure whether it was the right thing to do or simply the pull of the moment. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned slightly toward me, letting our proximity stretch just enough to feel intimate without breaking the quiet balance. Her hand brushed mine as she shifted, and I caught it, holding it gently for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. "It's been nice," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice carried the weight of more than just politeness. "More than I expected." She laughed softly, that warm, melodic sound that had been echoing in my mind all afternoon. "Me too," she admitted. There was a pause, a hesitation that spoke volumes, and then she did something entirely unexpected. She leaned forward and pressed a soft, deliberate kiss to my cheek. Just once, brief, but lingering enough that the warmth of it stayed with me. I felt the pull of the moment, the awareness of our closeness, the subtle electricity in the air. For a second, I thought the world outside might vanish entirely, leaving only the quiet intimacy of her apartment, the glow of the lamp, and the shared understanding between us. It was the culmination of every glance, every brush of fingers, every shared laugh, every silent moment of connection since the day began. We stepped back slightly, both smiling, a little shy now but fully aware of the unspoken truth between us. There was something real here, something tender and slow-growing, and it wasn't fleeting. It was the beginning of a connection that could last, however cautiously, however quietly, however beautifully. "I should go," I said finally, reluctantly, gathering my courage and my tools. But as I reached the door, she stood, brushing her hair back, and held my gaze. There was a softness in her eyes that made me pause. "See you soon?" she asked, her smile gentle but full of promise. "Definitely," I replied, and for the first time that day, I walked away feeling lighter, warmer, and aware that something meaningful had begun. Slow, delicate, and entirely ours. As the door closed softly behind me, I realized that fixing a simple light switch had done more than illuminate a room. It had illuminated something far brighter. The subtle spark between two people, carefully building, quietly waiting, and now, finally, recognized. Did you feel the sparks between them too? Yellow heart if you enjoyed this slow burn romance. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. And tell me in the comments, would you ever act on a connection like theirs?